You are listening to Key to the Bridge, brought to you by your friends at Keystone Therapy and Training Services, where we will be sharing human stories, talking about community resources, mental health, and wellness. This is a podcast for everyone. Welcome. All right, let's get this party started. Welcome to Key to the Bridge. We're here on this mom drop-off morning. We made it here. Really excited to be here. And I'm Erica Bosque, your host to Key to the Bridge. And I'm going to let my amazing guest introduce herself and tell you a little bit about what she's doing in the world aside from dropping off amazing children at school.
Okay.
Yes, that's what happened.
Yeah.
We ran in here today.
Yep.
We did that. We should acknowledge that happened.
We did.
And we'll jump into what we're going to be talking about. So go ahead, Larkin. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Larkin O'Leary, and I am the COO and co-founder of Common Ground Society, and also mom to James and June Bell, and wife to Peter, and, all the things to everybody. And Common Ground Society is a local Sonoma County nonprofit. We do two things. One, we support our local disability community, families who have kids with disabilities, medical complexities, or any sort of unique need. We offer different support groups for moms, dads, targeted support groups, as well as family meetups for chance of connection. The second thing we do is present to people. So we talk about acceptance and inclusion. We've hit over 50,000 students,
So many
which
people.
is so amazing, plus thousands of other college and community people who have listened to our message and taken our Be the One challenge. And I'm just a teacher and a mom who saw a need in our community, and here we are.
And here we are. Here we are, just doing all the things. And fun fact, Larkin and I grew up together here in Santa Rosa. We went to school together.
Yep.
We've kind of been awesome badasses from the start, so we'll just, throw that out there. Just
typical Sonoma County story, right?
Yeah,
we knew
that's
each
right.
other in another life.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. Getting things going. Well, I'm really excited that you're here today because you and I, over the beginning of the school year, the past couple weeks, I feel like have been on similar paths as we enter back to school time. And we're still in a place where I think our youth and families are trying to figure out what it looks like now to go to school.
Yeah.
And Sonoma County has had a little bit of a longer, I would say, like post situation since the fires of 2017. I think there's been, because you were teaching at that time. Yeah. So just coming from 2017 until now, I think we're still trying to figure out what it looks like to support the youth and families in schools as more of a community,
Right.
kind of centered model at the school site, what the adults are being asked to do, and then what's going on with the babies.
Yeah.
Because we've got a lot of different needs and things going on. So I was specifically thinking about you a couple days ago as I was asked to assist with the decision of did a student need a 504 plan or an IEP. And you popped in my head. I'm like, oh, yeah, I get to see Larkin on Wednesday. And it was that moment where all of the things were converging like into one around what do we do. And then you posted your amazing beach ball conversation around IEP meetings. If you haven't seen it, check out Common Ground Society on Instagram. There's an amazing visual about a beach ball. But the point of the beach ball being that the student is at the center of the conversation of what's supposed to be happening. And in that meeting, I wasn't facilitating necessarily what was going on with the student.
Yeah.
It was watching the adults, trying to figure out what to do. Like everybody's heart was 100% like in the right place.
Yes.
But I felt like we were at a meeting about figuring out a plan, but I didn't know if anybody was going to be able to do the plan.
Right. These are the adult problems that that we are pushing on our children, and then which in turn makes us look at the children as problems, but really they're not the problems. We're the adults that are setting up this community and the society, and we're not doing the best job of it. Despite the hearts being in the right places. I mean, part of the reason that I talk about my journey as an educator is because I became an educator because I had an educator who took the time to create a connection with me. You know, I was that one that was maybe throwing pizza at lunch and getting into trouble. That was me.
Sounds like
and it was fun, as a matter of fact. But then I had a teacher who connected with me, and she helped me understand that I was cared about at school. And that made me try harder. And that made me feel more comfortable with who I was, which in turn gave me that ability to focus and do all of the things. And so I always say connection is key to inclusion. And if we are not connecting with the students and their strengths and what it is that causes their motor to run, we are never going to get out of first gear.
Never. Yeah. And kids got that read.
Yes.
That's the one part that I do love about them.
Right.
It's pretty darn consistent about how quickly they pick up on who you are.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
If you want a reality check, talk to somebody between the ages of 3 and 6, and they'll give it to you straight.
Yep.
My question that was populating in my head that I was thinking about for you is, what have you noticed getting into the many schools and systems that you've been in the past couple of years, especially as James has entered the public school system? What have you noticed has been some of like the tipping points of the school system and the adults involved, and even sometimes the classroom, just like what's going on, being some of like the tipping points of when there is I don't know if it's intentionally the exclusion conversation, but it's like, how do we get this kid what they need so that everybody else isn't being impacted by this kiddo?
Yep.
Where I 100% get that line of thought, and we have to discuss it. I'm just wondering, like, what are some of the trends that you've seen where there is that tipping point of the shift?
You know, what's interesting is every teacher we've had has been on board with James being in their class, excited, you know, asking for James to be in their classes. And I've really felt the love and passion behind their care for him and desire to help him. What's missing desperately is the training and use universal design for learning, right? Training in the fact that we don't all have to be doing the same thing at the same time and producing the same results. An example I use in our presentations when I talk about sight words, right? So there was a time James got a packet home from school, and his teacher said, you know, he doesn't know any of his sight words. I need you to practice. And I was shocked, but I believe the teacher, right? So we go home and we practice the sight words, and he knew them all. And so I went back to school, and when I always presume positive intent. I know that these teachers' hearts are in the right places because that was me. I didn't know, right? And I always just do what I've done because that's what we do until we learn, right? So I went back to the teacher and I said, you know, how are you assessing the sight words that you're asking him? And she said, well, he can't say them. So I said, so James is non-speaking. So just because he can't say the words doesn't mean he doesn't know what those words are. He just needs to be assessed in a different way. If you're assessing his ability to speak, great assessment for that. But if you're assessing his knowledge of these words on the table, why don't we put him out in an array? And he can point to the word that you say, and that way showing you he knows the words. And the teacher was totally receptive to that and has changed her practices for kids like James. And it's not just kids who are non-speaking. What about a kid who's having a hard day? What about a kid who doesn't feel like talking, you know? And these are all things that can impact learning. And as you mentioned, well, who knows what's happening here?
Well, hydrate.
Coffee. Yeah. As you mentioned, the fires and the floods, right? Our kids are not the population I was taught to teach. I was taught to teach to the head pin, right? I was taught to teach to the center of the class. But what happens when you do that is there are always two kids that are left standing. And this is not just about kids that are like James and need that extra support. it's about the kids that need the most challenge as well, right? They're getting left behind. And the kids who have trauma or IEPs or 504s or English language learners or foster youth or socioeconomically disadvantaged or trauma or anxiety, there are not hardly any kids that don't fit into any of those buckets.
Yeah.
So why are we still trying to do what we were doing before? It doesn't make any sense. There is this urgent need for shifting education, like now. And we're going to watch more teachers quit. We're going to watch more kids not graduate if we don't shift the way that we're educating our students, like yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday would be great. That would be great. Yesterday would be awesome.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, when you talk about the training piece, I could get on a soapbox about this, so I'm going to try to narrow down my question. I'm assuming some of what you're saying, too, is like from the start, because you went to a teaching credential program. You did that experience. And the standards of a teaching credential program, most in the state of California, like, still don't include what it is that you're talking about in terms of your training. And Larkin, I will say this probably 1,000 times in some shape or form throughout my career, but as a social worker, trained as a social worker, I'm blown away by the fact that we don't realize how many other jobs are social workers.
Yep.
They've always been a form of social worker,
right.
And the training to get into that role, though, isn't set up in that way. And so then there's this feeling of, well, like, how am I doing this wrong? And it's like, well, you're not really doing it wrong.
Right.
It's just there are things that were left out and continue to be left out because the practice of social work needs to be, well, practiced.
Yes.
And how you're going to evolve for you as a person. Like, people are like, oh, how do you do this now? And I'm like, well, I'm not the same social worker I was when I was 23.
Right.
Like, I'm not. I changed too. And so how that works. In education, though, it's a very interesting example of how you get a teaching credential, whatever that experience was.
Right.
And then the training that you're talking about exists in some form of like a 72-hour period right before you start the school year. Like, that's usually what people are given, más o menos, as my daughter said this morning. And I always wonder about that as teachers, like, because you could go out and you can get it for yourself and you have to figure out what that looks like, but it's not designed for there to be a
and
schedule,
you don't get paid.
a
and
schedule
you don't get supported.
Or the pay to continue your growth.
Right.
In the practice. And so when you are with these teachers, because you're at a bunch of different places, what are some of the wishes? Like, what are the things that they wish they would know more about or would have gotten earlier?
Well, I mean, you think about like all of the psychologists and people who work with IEPs these days are talking about just the magnitude of meetings and how many kids. Should we 504, IEP, what do we need to do? How do we, like, SST, MTSS meet, all these things, right? For all these kids.
So many letters. So many
I know,
letters.
Right? Do any of them make sense? No.
I don't know.
But all of that, a lot of that, not all of it, a lot of it could be avoided if we were to change our aim when we're educating, right? If we were to use universal design for learning, so meaning having visuals in each lesson, having multiple opportunities for kids to show what they know in different ways. And this is what we need to be training our staff in, and we need to start utilizing the adults on campus in different ways, right? Like, we have a special day class on James's campus that has 4 adults and I think 3 students in the class. Yet there is a TK class that has 24 TKers, so hi, herding cats, 24 TKers and 2 teachers. And all of those kids, all of them, could benefit from OT and speech. And all of those can benefit from circle time and one-to-one instruction and modeling of appropriate behavior in classrooms. And so doing what we've always done and then expecting different results, it's not the way we do things. It's the way we do things. It's not the way we should be doing things.
Technically, isn't like doing the same thing but expecting a different outcome the definition of insanity?
That is
a quote from somewhere. I didn't write that quote, but I've heard it.
I've heard it too.
I understand what it means.
And it's true. And so one of the things we need to do is we need to value teachers' time. We need to pay them and honor their time with stipends or whatever for that continued education. We need to offer followed up support after the continued education, because having a boot camp on UDL is amazing, and let's do that. But also, how about then let's have monthly meetings where all the first grade teachers can come together and be like, gosh, that lesson really didn't work for Johnny. He sat under the table this whole time, or I don't have visuals for this lesson. Does anybody? And we can share resources. We don't need to be stuck in our little silos, right? There are people out there that want to do this. And I think really the biggest piece that I'm advocating for is that teachers are trained, they are valued, they are supported continually after that. And I think that will make a world of a difference.
Larkin, this might sound like a simple question, but as a teacher, how often do you feel like at the end of the day you were carrying around what you experienced in the school day, right? Like the day ends, because I'm around teachers a lot. The day ends, and what happens to them at 3:00 is a really interesting thing to observe because of the weight of what it is that they're being asked to do.
Yeah.
And administrators.
Yeah.
Them too.
Yeah.
I've watched people walk to their car and I'm like, I don't know if they should drive home.
Right.
They might need a minute.
Right.
And so I wonder too, when you're talking about universal, learning design, so that ability to hold a space where everybody's uniqueness is supported is an interesting transition from what you're taught as a teacher. And I'm wondering, people talk about wanting to do it, but what are some of the obstacles that you're seeing teachers are having? And then some teachers too who are doing some things that are working for them and for their students.
Yeah. Obstacles are always time and finding substitutes and being able to pay these teachers, even though there are funds. It's we have to be more creative with no, instead of just no, we can't. Let's find a way. Instead of no, we can't. Let's find a way, because it's so important. Every single person in this world exists because of teachers. How we don't value that. We have rocket scientists, we have doctors, we have lawyers, all because they went to school. Correct? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yes. They went to they went to school. I'm pretty sure.
To school. They learned, and why we don't put more emphasis and value in teacher education. I forget your question.
Yep. That's okay. Well, I'm just thinking I guess what I'm asking is,
what are the barriers?
What are the barriers? And you give a teacher something like UDL.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what UDL is, you can Google it. It's about universal learning design and
design for learning.
Designs for learning. Excuse me. I always want to say learning design. Design for learning. And the ability to have a classroom that has more diverse options in terms of the way people learn.
Right.
Which is fascinating to me because dropped my baby off today at preschool, and preschool innately is set up in that way.
Exactly.
Right? Because you're small, and it would make sense that you would have stations and that you
But why doesn't that make sense growing up?
Well, because apparently my needs stop after 3 years old, that I would need that.
But seriously, the world needs all types of people. You do something vastly different from what I do. You don't want me doing open heart surgery on you, trust me.
Yeah.
We all have our strengths. We all have our challenges. Why do we not hone in on those strengths to help scaffold the challenges?
Yeah.
That would make learning fun. You would be able to differentiate your lessons guided towards whatever the interests are for the kids, right? So we need to learn multiplication. This kid likes music. This kid likes construction. you can find multiplication patterns in music and construction and drawing, and it's so simple if we just shift our mindsets to thinking that we're not like there to fix the deficits, but rather scaffold the deficits through the strengths. And I think that would make that. So let me give you an example. When I started teaching middle school, I taught U.S. history to 8th graders. And oh my gosh, they loved it.
I mean, it was probably their favorite class.
Ever.
To go to U.S. history.
Yeah, they were pumped. They were like, take me in George Washington. Yes.
Yeah.
No, that is not what happened.
No.
They came to U.S. history and, you got the looks of 7th and 8th graders wanting to learn U.S. history or learning U.S. history. But the difference in what I did from my first year to my second year was I allowed choice. So the first thing I did when the kids came into my classroom was I had them write me a letter. And they wrote me a letter the first thing I did when they came into my class was I told them about myself. I was an open, honest, I'm a teacher here from Sonoma County. I had a hard time in middle school. Like, I love teaching. I wasn't the best student always. And, I'm here to support you. And then write me a letter, right? Tell me about your strengths. Tell me about your challenges. Tell me about what you like to do. And I would take those letters and I would sort of shift my curriculum each year a little bit to meet the students that I had today. Because my students I had today were very different from my students I had last year. Every year it was different. And all the students were different, which is fine. But being able to pull out a multitude of different ways for kids to learn. So when we talk about the American Revolution, we would do like an outside game where we play flag football, and we would, have France had to start over at the tree over there. And then the kid, the one team was bigger than the other team. And some of them ended up having to walk on their knees, to give them that visual of what that felt like. Then we would come in and we would talk about the events leading up to the American Revolution. And I would give the kids a menu and be like, show me, these 10 events leading up to the American Revolution. You can write me an essay. You can take a multiple choice quiz, or if you have your own idea, like, come tell me that idea. So I had these 2 girls in my class. They were twin chefs. And so they came up to me and they said, can we make recipes for each of the 10 events leading up to the American Revolution? And they did. And they added a little pepper here, a little spice there, a little lemon, right? They added these things to show me that they understood in a way that was fun for them, in a way that they were motivated to actually do the learning, to be able to associate it with what we were talking about. And I have kids that come up to me and they're like, that was like my favorite lesson of the year, because if I had all of those kids write essays about the 10 events leading up to the American Revolution, I'd have to read them all. And I don't like to read essays written by middle schoolers, but also, sure, they're super exciting. But any kid who doesn't know how to write an essay will fail every time, because that's what we're assessing when we make them do the same thing that everyone else is doing to assess what they know.
I'm over here thinking to myself about the teachers that I had and the ones that I felt most connected to. And some had more of, like, we would say, like, the traditional classroom, but they all had the ability to, like, pivot. Mm-hmm. And that is something that I think is almost like untaught.
Yes.
I think about how people come in to schools, and they're usually young, and there's a lot of energy around doing whatever it is that they want to do, because they got into this profession 99.9% of the time because they want to be teachers.
Yes.
They want to be administrators in schools, and they like kids. So
and they probably had someone who did the same thing for them.
Correct. They want to do it. And then something happens at some point where the sustainability or the culture of where you are shifts that energy. Yeah. Because I do think that there's something about, I've done an accidental study where I'm going to schools and they're like, oh my God, this school's amazing. And then I show up and most of the people who are teaching are under the age of 30. And I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense right now. Right. Well, this school is like cooking, man. There's like 5,000 things going on because they can. And then as they evolve and have families and life changes, and they get exposed to so many little humans, that shift happens. Like, and so I wonder, like, thinking to myself, when you're talking about training them, also too, like, how we're going to keep the energy and the connection and the we use the word balance, and sometimes right now I feel like it's kind of like a dirty word to say balance, because people are like, nothing is balanced. And I think what I think is, when I think balanced, I think what has to be adjusted so that you can manage your life. It doesn't mean it's equal. It just means there has to be some form of figuring it out. So we were talking earlier about the question. I'm just thinking to myself, as you know, you're going through your experience with James and you're with these adults and they're trying to support you. What do you see are the things that the adults like need to work on? Professionally and maybe also personally.
It's a lot of the red tape. It's a lot of these laws and rules and different things. Teachers don't know about the laws and rules. They don't know about IEPs and things like that, like as a general education teacher. And I would like to make a side note to really understand that when I went to school as a multiple subject teacher. There's multiple subject, there's single subject. There's no such thing as a general education teacher. That is a made-up thing. We are taught, when we go to school to be a teacher, we are taught the curriculum, like the what of our classroom, not the who. That's something we have generalized as a society, right? It's not the what, it's the who. Wait, other way around. No, it's not the who, it's the what.
It's the content.
And so, but we as a society have now said, but that's not like what I'm supposed to do. And teachers don't, as a teacher, I can speak for myself. I didn't understand IEPs. I would go to the RSP teacher and be like, what grade do I give him? I don't understand. Like, he's not doing any of these things. And it's like, well, he's not working on these things. He's working on his IEP goals. And so like these goals are generally like scaffolding up to this certain thing, but it's very different, right? And so understanding that that red tape and like all of the things that come with it, and understanding that we're really just working on each kid growing as an individual as they are. It's real hard when teachers are told, well, you need to have these test scores, and like, I was never good at tests like that. Like I was not. I still am not. I had to take that canine companion test, and I like about had a panic attack because I was like, they're not going to give me the dog. I can't do it. I like started crying. Yeah. I'm like, because tests are hard for me, but I like to think I'm a pretty proficient person in life and successful in what I've been doing. And so when teachers are under the stress of, you need to have the test scores, you need to do this, you need to do that, and they're not able to freely be who they are and they know they should be, you get put into a box, right? And you're like, okay, I got to stay in this box. And teachers like follow the rules most times.
Which is interesting because that's also what then happens to the youth that we're serving.
Yes.
Is they get put in a box.
Yep.
So they're just also perpetuating what happens to them.
Because they're watching us. Yeah. Like they watch us and they mimic us. I mean, look at my 4-year-old daughter.
Well, look out.
Lord help us all.
I know. Well, I know. I have a couple firecrackers at home too, and I wonder constantly, like, that's some loving karma that's going to come my way immediately.
Yep.
Because, Larkin, I'm just thinking to myself, you have James in school, and I think about the perspective that you're offering, and there not being a way to work on the communication of what it is that's going on. Because I do think there's this, right, it's a system, and so the system of education thinks that you go to it, and it's supposed to, in theory, it'd be great if it knew what it was supposed to be doing.
Right.
But the speed at which things have changed make it really, really challenging. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking about, too, just the leaning in of community support. Mm-hmm. And Sonoma County is new to this. It's new to using community resources in a school-based fashion.
Sure.
And you and I could talk from personal experienced growing up in Sonoma County. You didn't get a whole lot of other than academia in school. If you needed something else, you had to go somewhere else to get it.
And fight for it. I mean, even like for in order for James is going through like an autism assessment right now. I know it's interesting. I had to answer, no joke, 800 questions, including one of them being he's a perfect angel. He's always a perfect angel, or he's perfect in every way. That was one of them. That was one of the questions, and it was always, sometimes, never, and whatever, seldom, or whatever. Like
one of the questions on the assessment was, is he always a perfect angel?
He is a perfect angel.
That was a sentence.
That was a sentence that I was supposed to say, no, my son is not a perfect angel, or yes, he is a perfect angel. He's 9. So like, I mean, what?
No one.
Sometimes, maybe.
Always,
like,
sometimes, never.
And it was so absurd that I actually didn't answer that question, and the person had to call me back and be like, "Hey, you forgot to answer one question." I'm like, I can't. What? Like, how do you even answer that question?
And 800 questions because of the amount of assessments that he was given.
This was just one assessment, right, to get this autism diagnosis. That's just the first part. Like, I already went and spent an hour and a half in the psychologist's office talking to psychologists about all of this. Then we get all these papers to answer. And his teacher had to answer the same ones. Bless her heart, over summer, I was like, here, I'm sorry. Right? And so 800 questions. And then I'm just waiting for her to call me and tell me whatever they're going to, then he's going to go be diagnosed potentially. Like, I don't even.
Well, and here's the question. What does he get by having that label?
Yeah.
What does he get out of that?
Yeah.
What do you get out of that?
Yeah.
Do you know?
No.
And
so in theory, like typical kids, right? Typically going through this is what they fight for in order to get the services they need, right? We have to fight to be able to get OT, speech, anything that kids need. Just like, when James was born with Down syndrome and hearing loss, I had to wait until he was 2 in order to get him speech services because he wasn't behind yet. And I challenged that because that's preposterous that my child who is hard of hearing and has Down syndrome isn't going to need speech therapy. Why, like, this reactive approach? Like, why are we not being proactive? I mean, I got him speech at 18 months after months and months of like fighting and battling it. But it's like, that's me, someone who knows the laws, someone who can advocate. What about the people who don't know the laws, who don't know how to advocate, who don't speak English? It's not okay. It's not okay.
I'm having
These
a lot
are the
of feelings.
barriers. I have so many feelings.
Well, this is a lot of feelings because what you're saying is true. Like, it's just what you're experiencing. And Larkin, I just relate to having the education and the resources and the being able to connect to different things, and then that firecrackerness that you and I were just mentioning earlier in addition. And so we're going to get the shit figured out. Like, we're going to do it. Like, we're going to get out there and we're going to do it, and we're going to make it happen for our kids, and we're also super down to do it for other families as well. And the fact that you are still in this process of what are the things that we can get James through the labels that he needs to get access to the support and services that he needs is just, it's odd.
Well, it's such a waste of time.
Yeah. Like, why would we do it?
It's such a waste of time. And this is why I push for that universal design for learning. Because then we don't need to diagnose everybody with everything. We just have it for everyone. It doesn't need to be written in the IEP that there's a timer in the classroom, because it's just there, because it's something we use to help all students. It's visual, something to help all students. A kinesthetic activity, all students. Offering the ability of choice in assessment and the ability for kids to show what they know in a way that is meaningful to them for all kids.
Have you seen, this is maybe a more specific question, but with UDL, is there conversation happening around what's going to happen to 504 plans and IEPs? Because you and I right now are talking about the the differences between an accommodation that is put into a classroom, right? And an accommodation means that you're accommodating. You're providing access to things so that the content, right, of the academic class is not being changed in any way to meet the standard, right? We're going to use all the big system language, right? Real fancy, right? Like that's the idea with an accommodation. But you still, in some places, need a 504 plan or an IEP to even get an accommodation.
Yep.
Right? Like if you wanted, I think about the amount of people who needed more time on tests.
Right.
And that being something that we were going through this process for. And I'm like, well, why don't we just give them more time on tests? Like, I don't understand. And it was because there's still the culture of, well, if we're going to give kids an advantage, there was still that language around that being something that is extra. And like, if we're going to do that for them and we're not going to do that for everybody else, we have to prove why they need it. So when we're moving into UDL, have you noticed? Because I'm thinking about the UDL stuff. There's so much stuff.
Yeah.
Some really pretty stuff too that's being created. Thank you, artists, around it. But the stuff that's on there, I'm wondering, my mind is not going to this place, like what's going to be on a 504 plan or an IEP if you have UDL happening in a classroom, because there's so many things on there.
Well, I think that we're not going to have to diagnose every single student with every single thing, right? We're going to be able to be like, oh, we can accommodate that, right? And teachers aren't going to feel so overwhelmed by these behaviors because it will help kids to be able to regulate themselves and feel comfortable, like, and feel supported. And so kids, I'm not saying that we need to take away IEPs or 504s.
No.
It's very important, and labels are important, but I'm also saying that there's a way. I feel like there are so many misdiagnoses happening because kids have anxiety and they have trauma and they have fear and they have all of these different things that we could easily like slow down for a second. We don't need, like, why we got right back into academics after kids were out of the classroom for so long, and we didn't take a year or two to just focus on social
emotional learning.
Thank you.
Hey, look at you and I helping each other with all the acronyms. Social emotional learning. Yep, we did not.
We didn't take the time to do that. And so how do we expect our kids to just adjust? Like, it doesn't.
Well, we didn't do that for anyone.
Make any sense, right?
We did
how
it
do
for
we
no one.
and teach like all the things, right? And so we're still requesting those tests to be taken, and it's like, why?
Well, and why is the question that I think keeps probably you and I up at night. Is the why is interesting, because I think about if you've had an experience where your needs haven't been met and then you contorted yourself to accommodate whatever you were in. Those are the adults who are currently like making decisions. Like we've grown up in a time where like that was what is required. Right. You can't sit in a chair for 7.5 hours. You better figure it out.
Yep.
Or you're going to be punished.
Right.
I mean, recess detention, which is so fascinating to even think about now. Somebody who couldn't be still was then put on recess detention to then go and be more still.
Yes.
Fascinating to me. But like, that's the kind of culture we grew up in. It's like, how do I deny saying what I need to fit the system? And so now our group of age group is like, we're the people in charge. And so I just keep going to these meetings where I'm like, I want to talk to, like, I feel like the adults need their own, like, at least 20-minute support group before we even get into talking about the baby.
Yep.
And I keep saying baby because I had a meeting with a 16, almost 17-year-old person. And then I was also dealing with a TKer. And the youth, I'm just like, you're so young.
But they have to be so old.
But they have to be so old. And I was like, this is... And to then watch the parents who are then there trying, just trying to like hold whatever they can to get their kiddo what it is that they need. And then the adults, I think, of the system wanting to say yes, but almost just constantly in the practice of saying no first.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, I'm like, what, do we always do that?
Right.
Like, is it like,
Right.
is this what we do? Then maybe we should just, why do we even have the first meeting then if we're going to just say no?
Yeah.
And then come back. And there's these weird rules that I don't even know if they're real rules.
I don't think they are. Most of them are not. I'm just going to say most of them are not real rules. No,
like,
they're not.
Are they real rules?
No.
Like, I don't know.
No.
I don't know. Because when I just, or I like the part of the law that just says there's so much about like basically at the district's discretion around like whatever they've got going on with funds or services or what they, and I'm like, that's also terrible too for the people of power.
Yeah.
Because then how are they supposed to make
the
decision? So I guess I'm just thinking to myself, as you move into school now with James and you just did, I'm like, the autism diagnosis that you went through, what medical institution were you using for that process?
Kaiser.
Okay. Well, we don't have enough time on this podcast to talk about Kaiser. That could be its own podcast.
Well,
that could be a series unto itself.
It's interesting because I will say within Kaiser, I try and not like. It's hard with the mental health piece. Yes, like this is not okay. Within Kaiser, we have an incredible team. I have an amazing doctor, an amazing GI, an amazing cardiologist, all of these people that I've built over the years, even though people saying, oh, Kaiser. But really, honestly, it's anywhere. It depends on your team.
Yeah.
The problem with the mental health thing, with Kaiser, when I went in and talked to the person, I was like, I think a lot of these things stem from his trauma. And she's like, yeah, I agree. I'm not sure that he has the autism diagnosis. And I'm like, great. So like, why are we doing this? And she's like, well, we should rule it out. And so, okay, fine. And I'm like, so she's like, so I could see him again in like, 2 months or something like that. And I'm like, so your clinical opinion is that James will benefit from therapy from you once every 2 months? I'm like, he has had 30 surgeries, hundreds of days in the hospital. He's had a G-tube. Taking him to go get his blood drawn is trauma for both of us every time. And James talks about getting his blood drawn for weeks afterwards. And you're telling me the best you can do? And she's like, well, we can offer an online class in the interim. And I'm like, he spent a year of his schooling online. Like, my child this is not something that is going to be helpful for him. What's helpful for him is connection and understanding his mind and his body and what, like, that he is safe and okay now, And, so for us to try, and this is where the diagnosis and the label thing is hard for me, because for us to try and fit him in some sort of other box, what he needs is somebody right now weekly to help him work through what he's been through. And that will give him more space in his brain, because I know that when I'm trying to do this podcast with you today, but in my mind, I'm thinking about what's going on with James at school right now and what happened at drop off and how I'm feeling about that. Mm-hmm. And that keeps my brain from really being able to process what we're talking about and be able to move forward. And I'm an adult, let alone a child. And so what are we doing? We're the adults now. That's what they keep telling me, is that like I'm an adult. I don't believe it.
I don't either.
But like that's what they're saying. And so we have these people running these systems that don't have any connection, or what's happening. I don't know. Like, we need to get a principal. We need to get the superintendent. All they need to do is go to that TK class and get them from the class to the lunchroom and sitting on the floor in a straight line, and they'll understand, right? Run one lesson and you'll understand what we need in that TK classroom.
You'll at least know what questions to ask.
Right.
Because I don't even know. I think like that. Larkin, I'm thinking about what you're saying, because what James is, and you and your family as an example, right, is something that feels, I think, sometimes like extreme in a story, right? And totally. I'm not saying that it's not, but at the same time, you are talking about what's happening to everyone, and then how I'm thinking about how many people well, probably most of the students that are in school have some form of a journey like what you're talking about for them. Like James having 30 surgeries, I can't really, every time you say it, I have a hard time processing what that even is. But I think about the amount of what James is carrying and all the people are carrying, and you're right. I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, if he has autism, that doesn't mean he's not going to need therapy. Like, what does that, just even the sentence of we need to rule it out. But I wish they had just said we need to rule it in.
Right.
Because if we know that that is another way that James operates in the world, then that only assists in knowing him better, and then we could give him more of maybe what he needs.
Right.
But even that thought process, we need to rule that out, because if he has autism, then maybe he needs less therapy for his trauma. What does that even mean?
I don't even know, because it doesn't, I mean, he's the same child. And unless you're going to support him in a different manner, having another label like that changes nothing. He's still James. He still has the same, he still has the waking up in the middle of the night. No. He still is Russell talking about his phlebotomist, like all the days, I mean, he still has that. So what are we going to do about it? This is where my part of the labels is like, why? Like, it doesn't, we need to meet each kid where they're at and scaffold the deficits through the positive, through the strengths for every instance in our lives. I mean, we do. How do we do that? We have time to create connections with people, because that's what it's all about. Every single thing relates back to creating a connection with someone. Everything. The only way our society is going to move forward is if we truly connect with one another, and we listen to one another, and we listen to understand, and we don't listen to respond. We listen to empathize and create those connections.
Well, and if we don't start immediately, continue like in expanding what it is that we're doing with our young folk, right? They've already been through. I think about people who are like 14 right now.
Yeah.
And the experiences that they've already had. If we're just
not even mentioning the freaking active shooter drills they have to do, and like thinking about all of those things.
Yeah. I mean,
what?
But we're here to learn, Larkin. You need to sit in your chair and you need to produce the content, and you need to meet the test score, and you need to meet the standard. And I think about what you're asking around people of power coming back to have more direct service experiences. That is something that is not common practice, right? Where you do that. And it also speaks to the education field. It's really interesting how they still do that. Like they don't, you don't do that. I don't know how often the people of power go to a classroom.
I know that like our board members will walk around the classroom like once a month or whatever, but like that's more dog and pony show, the board members are coming. Board members are here. Like on the mic, like get ready. Board members are here. Like, so that people know, right? And so it's not like true things that are happening. Just like when someone comes in to observe a kid, the kid, like if you go in to observe James, he's going to sit there and he's going to smile at you and he's going to flirt with you, and he's not going to be his true authentic self until it's just what is happening, right?
Well, yeah, because you know that people are watching.
Right. Yeah. And for him, connection is key to everything.
Okay, Larkin, I'm like thinking about like when you're talking about what's next or what we need to do. You've talked about UDL, connection. Is there anything else that you think we need to hit up in the next? I mean, literally, I think about between now and Christmas, we're at an another interesting time period.
Yeah.
Where I think we're going to be figuring out what it looks like to still live with what we've got.
Yeah.
Going on. And so I'm just like, connection and UDL would be amazing for schools. Is there anything else that you think people should do?
In schools, when I'm talking about connection too, I'm not just talking about like the teacher and the student. I'm talking about like the teacher and the parent, and the creating communities of belonging, right? So when I taught middle school, I took the time every year to get to know my kids in those first 2 weeks of school. And then I would send each kid parents an email. I love Johnny. Johnny is so funny. He sure has a lot to say, that Johnny. I can't wait to come watch him play soccer sometime. Thank you for trusting me with him, and I look forward to working with you to a great year. In eighth grade, I can't tell you how many emails I got back where the parents were like, oh, I was scared to open your email because I've never, not one time ever, received an email from a teacher that was like good about my child. And like for me right now, watching what's happening with James, the adults on campus love him, but the people that don't know him as deeply as the ones that I know and have a connection with, like, I have yet to hear one nice thing that my son has done, or one cute thing, or one cool thing. Like, I get it from the people who know him and me and know how we work. But the people who are working with him that don't, all I hear is that he's cleared the library today, or he's under his desk, or he's like, we're still working on it. And it's like, you don't see my child. So how can you work with them? So if we're not taking the time to create connections with the parents, we're never going to create a team that wants to work together. We're not going to create that building of trust and understanding that, like, whether or not those people that don't know James, like, care for him and love him deeply, I'll never know, right? Because I don't have any sort of connection with that. And so for me, it is all about connection and listening, and that's the only way we're going to move forward as a community, is creating those communities of belonging through connection.
I feel like that's the mic drop we needed.
Boom. Done.
Boom. Done. I really appreciate you being here and sharing with us, because we need to keep talking about it.
Yes.
Because
we do.
It's our community, and we're gonna keep doing the thing.
Yep.
So I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. This was lovely.
You're welcome. All right. And we're all done. Thanks for listening to Key to the Bridge. You've been listening to Key to the Bridge, a podcast brought to you by your friends at Keystone Therapy and Training Services. I'm your host, Erica Bosque. Key to the Bridge is recorded and produced by Jeff Henderson and Brian Henderson. This is a podcast for everyone.